He's been called a clown, a genius, a liar, and a political survivor. Alexander Boris de Pfeffel Johnson, the man who charmed London, led the Brexit charge, and became Britain's Prime Minister in chaotic times. How did Boris rise to the top? And what happened when he got there? Let's find out. Boris Johnson was born on June 19, 1964, in New York City, which surprises many people even today. Yes, Britain's future Prime Minister actually came into this world as an American citizen before he became one of the most famous British politicians of his generation. Boris grew up in an upper-class British family. His father, Stanley Johnson, was a politician and writer, and his family tree was full of diplomats, academics, and people who traveled the world. So from childhood, Boris was surrounded by big ideas and strong opinions. Dinner table conversations were never boring in the Johnson house. As a boy, Boris was clever, but always a bit chaotic. A mix of sharp intelligence and that trademark untidy look that would become his signature style later in life. Like many from Britain's elite, Boris went to Eton College, one of the country's most famous and exclusive schools. Eton is where future prime ministers, princes, and top business leaders are made. There, Boris built a reputation for being clever, funny, and impossible to ignore, though sometimes he pushed the rules just to see what would happen. After Eton, he moved on to Oxford University, where he studied classics, diving deep into ancient Greek and Roman literature, history, and philosophy. But Boris wasn't just a quiet student reading dusty old books. He loved the stage, debates, and big gestures. He quickly joined the Bullingdon Club, a notorious all-male dining club for the rich and powerful. The Bullingdon was famous for wild dinners, expensive clothes, and drunken antics, but it was also a place to make powerful connections. Many future conservative politicians passed through that club, and so did Boris. Even at Oxford, Boris stood out. He was quick with jokes, had a dramatic way of speaking, and of course, that messy blonde hair that always made him look like he'd just stepped out of a storm. His friends remember him as someone who could make the whole room laugh one moment, and then crush you in a debate the next. Looking back, people who knew him then say you could already see what Boris would become. A man who knew how to stand out, win people over with charm and wit, and turn chaos into his own style. Before Boris Johnson ever stepped into Parliament, he made his name in journalism. And true to form, controversy wasn't far behind. After leaving Oxford, Boris didn't jump straight into politics like many of his classmates. Instead, he picked up his pen and stepped into the world of newspapers, where his sharp wit and love for drama found the perfect stage. He started at the Times, one of Britain's biggest newspapers. But his time there ended quickly and messily. Boris was fired for making up a quote for a story about an archaeological discovery. For most young journalists, that would have ended their career right there. But not Boris. He simply bounced back, using his charm and contacts to land another job at the Daily Telegraph. At the Telegraph, Boris found his style, mixing serious reporting with funny, dramatic opinions that made readers laugh, cheer, or sometimes roll their eyes. He became their Brussels correspondent, writing stories about the European Union that often exaggerated its rules and poked fun at European bureaucrats. His colorful reports made him a hero to many Eurosceptics in Britain, planting the seeds for the anti-EU message he would later use in politics. But Boris didn't stop there. He went on to become editor of The Spectator, a leading conservative magazine. Under his leadership, the magazine was lively, provocative, and sometimes scandalous, much like Boris himself. Alongside editing, he wrote columns for newspapers, filled with jokes, wordplay, and opinions that could be brilliant or offensive, or sometimes both at the same time. His writings often got him into trouble. He made comments that angered entire communities, used language that critics called careless or insulting, and yet, people kept reading him. For many readers, Boris was the funny, bumbling truth-teller who said what others wouldn't dare. For his critics, he was reckless, irresponsible, and played with prejudice for laughs. But in the eyes of the public, all of this helped build the image that would define Boris for years to come. The lovable rogue. A man who broke the rules, got into trouble, laughed it off, and somehow still charmed everyone around him. His journalism career didn't just make him famous. It taught him how to play the media, how to grab headlines, and how to turn controversy into popularity. Skills he would use again and again when he finally made the leap from newspapers to the House of Commons. In 2008, Boris Johnson took a huge step forward in his career. He decided to run for mayor of London, one of the biggest political jobs in the country. Many people laughed at the idea at first. Boris, with his messy hair and clumsy jokes, didn't look like the serious, polished politician Londoners were used to. But that was exactly his strength. He came across as different, entertaining, and full of energy. He went up against Ken Livingstone, the experienced Labour mayor who had already led London for years. It was a tough fight, but Boris's mix of jokes, charm, and clever campaigning worked. He won the election and shocked everyone by becoming the new mayor of the UK's capital city. As mayor, Boris promised to make London more modern and open for everyone. He focused on ideas that got him plenty of attention, like introducing the popular Boris bikes, a cycle hire scheme that made it easy for people to rent bicycles and ride around the city. Today, people still call them Boris bikes, a reminder of how this scheme became part of his legacy. One of the biggest moments of his time as mayor came in 2012, when London hosted the Olympic Games. The world watched as London put on a show, and Boris made sure everyone saw him too. He championed the Games as proof that Britain could do big things with style and confidence. The Olympics were a huge success, boosting London's image and giving Boris even more credit as a leader who could deliver results. But true to his style, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Boris became just as famous for his clumsy, funny moments. One of the most famous was when he got stuck on a zip line during a public event, dangling above a crowd while waving two little Union Jack flags and shouting jokes to the people below. For most politicians, it would have been a disaster. For Boris, it just made him more popular. Proof that he could laugh at himself and stay cheerful even when things went wrong. He served 2 terms as mayor, from 2008 to 2016, and used the job to build his reputation as a big, bold, and unusual politician who didn't follow the usual rules. For some, he was the fun mayor who got things done. For others, he was more about headlines than hard work. But whatever people thought, one thing was clear. Boris was no longer just a newspaper columnist or a backbench MP. He was now a national figure, with a growing fan base and bigger ambitions waiting just around the corner. In 2016, Boris Johnson made the boldest move of his entire political career. He decided to lead the campaign for Britain to leave the European Union, a decision that would change not only his future but the country's future too. At that time, Britain had been part of the EU for more than 40 years. Many people were unhappy with the EU, saying it had too much control over British laws, borders, and money. But leaving was still seen as a huge risk. Most big politicians, including the Prime Minister David Cameron, wanted to stay in. Boris, however, went the other way. He joined the Vote Leave campaign and quickly became its biggest star. He toured the country in a red bus with a famous message painted on the side, promising that Britain would save £350 million a week by leaving the EU. Money that he said could go straight to the NHS, the country's health service. This claim grabbed headlines and fired up the debate. Boris used his talent for catchy slogans and eye-catching moments to win people over. He talked about Britain taking back control of its borders and laws. He promised that leaving the EU would mean more freedom and more money for British people. As the vote got closer, the country became deeply divided. Families argued, friends fell out, and the news was full of debates about what Brexit would really mean. Many people were worried about the economy and jobs. Others felt hopeful that leaving would make Britain stronger and more independent. Then came June 23, 2016, the day of the referendum. When the results came in, the whole world was stunned. By a narrow margin, 52% to 48%, the British public had voted to leave the EU. Overnight, Britain's political map changed forever. For his supporters, Boris was the hero who stood up for ordinary people against the political elite. They saw him as the man who gave Britain back its voice. But for his critics, it was a very different story. They said Boris had misled the country with promises that wouldn't come true. The famous Red Bus and the NHS claim were called out as misleading. Many blamed him for the chaos and uncertainty that came after. Whether hero or villain, one thing was clear. Boris Johnson was now at the heart of the biggest change in British politics in decades. His gamble had paid off, and his next step would be even bigger. After the Brexit vote, Boris served as Foreign Secretary, but clashed with then Prime Minister Theresa May. When May resigned in 2019, Boris took his chance, winning the Conservative Party leadership and becoming Prime Minister. He promised to get Brexit done, and won a landslide election in December 2019, breaking Labour's strongholds in the north. Just months after his victory, Boris faced the biggest crisis of his life, the COVID-19 pandemic. At first, his government was criticized for reacting too slowly. Boris himself caught the virus and ended up in intensive care, a moment that shocked the country. His government later delivered a fast vaccine rollout, one of the UK's biggest successes during the pandemic, but scandals were brewing behind closed doors. In 2021 and 2022, Boris faced scandal after scandal. The biggest? Partygate. Allegations that his team held parties in Downing Street while the rest of the country was in lockdown. Photos, leaks, and lies led to public outrage. Ministers resigned, MPs turned on him. And finally, in July 2022, Boris Johnson announced he would step down as Prime Minister. Since leaving office, Boris has stayed in the spotlight, making speeches, writing books, and hinting at comebacks. Some say he's finished. Others think he could still return for one last shot at power. Love him or hate him, Boris Johnson remains one of the most colorful and controversial figures in British politics. Is Boris Johnson a genius opportunist or a reckless rule breaker? Did he save Britain with Brexit, or divide it forever? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, like the video, subscribe for more political deep dives, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.